there. Tonight, you are waking inside a country that has already written brave words about liberty and still smells of wet ash, old wool, animal breath, and a little fear. Before the sun fully climbs, you can already feel the truth that people living here knew better than any speechmaker. A new nation may have been declared, but an ordinary morning still begins with cold floorboards, a fading fire, a sore back, uncertain water, and the quiet knowledge that most lives are held together by repetition more than by glory. In a little while, we will step into cramped rooms, dark kitchens, rough clothes, and the first hard work of the day. And we will also feel the shadows resting underneath it all. Slavery, sickness, hunger, and the thin wooden walls that stand between comfort and ruin. If this kind of slow journey is your sort of thing, leave a like, subscribe, and settle in with me for a while. Now let the room grow dim around you. Let your jaw unclench. Let your shoulders fall, and allow the morning of 1789 to arrive very slowly. You are not waking in a private bedroom. That would be too generous. And 1789 is not a generous age. You open your eyes in a room that has already been used hard by night, by sleep, by breath, by smoke, and by weather pressing patiently at the walls. The light is faint at first, not because the sun is shy, but because the window is small and the glass is uneven and full of little ripples. So the dawn outside appears bent and softened, as if the whole world has been breathed upon. For a moment you do not move. You lie still and listen. Somewhere in the room another person turns over, the mattress giving a tired sigh beneath them. Straw rustles. A child makes the small, confused sound of someone still halfway inside a dream. Beyond the wall, a rooster sends out an opinion no one asked for. Firm, nasal, entirely convinced of its own importance. A wagon wheel complains in the distance. A dog answers nothing with great seriousness. There is no steady engine noise, no hidden electric hum, no stream of messages waiting to pounce on your mind. There is only air, wood, cloth, lungs, and the very old music of people waking because daylight is expensive and darkness is not useful. The mattress under you is stuffed with straw or corn husks or whatever the household managed to save and tie together months ago. At some point it may have felt softer. Now it feels lumpy in a personal way, like an object that has spent years learning exactly where to annoy the human spine. You shift your shoulder and find a knot. You shift your hip and discover another. Honestly, it is impressive. This bed is less a place of rest than a negotiation between fatigue and discomfort. And fatigue usually wins by knockout. The blanket over you is heavy. Wool, probably. Warm enough in spots, itchy enough in others. It holds the smells of the season and of the room itself. Smoke, damp timber, stale sleep, and the sour sweetness of bodies that work harder than they wash. Not because people are careless. Not really. More because hot water must be carried and heated. Soap must be made. Time must be spared. And all of those things are more difficult than a modern mind likes to admit. You sit up slowly. The movement asks something of your back at once. Morning in 1789 reaches you through the body first. Not through ideas, not through ambition, through muscles that remember yesterday. The low ceiling hangs above you, dark beams thick with hairs of smoke stain. If you were standing here with me, you would notice how the room seems to hold the night a little longer than the sky outside does. Smoke has a way of settling into a place until the place itself feels browned by it, as if the house had once been pale and then spent decades standing too near a fire it could never quite leave. This may be a narrow wooden home in a coastal town, with neighboring walls close enough that you know your neighbors by their coughs. Or it may be a log structure farther inland, one room deep, chinked with clay and moss, with cold sneaking through every weakness it can find. Either way, privacy is a rumor. Space is a privilege. The room belongs not to one life, but to several lives stacked together by necessity. You dress where you slept, because there is nowhere else to do it. That detail alone says a great deal about the age. There is no dramatic moment of reinvention in front of a mirror. There may not be much of a mirror at all. You simply reach for the garments that survived yesterday and will, with luck and some mending, survive today. Your hands know them by touch before your eyes properly know them by light. The first layer is linen, rougher than comfort, but kinder than wool. It has the cool, dry feel of cloth, made to absorb sweat and stand between skin and the outer world. Over that comes more fabric, heavier, denser, shaped by hands rather than by machines. You pull it on carefully. A shirt, a shift, stockings if you have them, a woolen gown or petticoat, perhaps breeches, waistcoat, coat, depending on who you are and what this day will demand. Buttons matter. Laces matter. Ties matter. If one fails, the whole business becomes irritating in a way that follows you for hours. Nothing you wear is casual. Casual belongs to a world with excess. Here, every stitch represents labor. Someone spun, vuva, cut, sewed, patched, washed, dried, and folded this cloth. Someone sat by weak evening light and pushed a needle through fabric while the room grew colder. Clothing is not fashion first. It is endurance you can button. You place your feet on the floor and the boards greet you with a chill clear enough to wake every last corner of the mind. If the floor is wood, it is rough, sometimes splintered, sometimes warped by damp and years. If it is packed earth, it keeps the memory of every season and gives none of it back kindly. You stand and the house makes its first little answering noises. A board speaking, a peg shifting, a distant pot settling somewhere near the hearth. That hearth, even before you fully turn toward it, you can feel its importance. The fireplace sits in the room like a second sun that must be persuaded to rise. If last night ended well, perhaps a small nest of embers still glows under gray ash. If not, then morning begins with flint, steel, dry tinner, patience, and a pair of hands that would rather still be asleep. A modern person might think of fire as atmosphere. In this room, fire is appetite, heat, light, cooked food, boiled water, dried clothes, and sometimes disaster waiting politely in the corner. You kneel. Ash softens under the poker. A breath here, another there. The ember brightens slightly, then fades, then brightens again. This tiny negotiation could decide the feel of the next hour. Without flame, the room remains half hostile. Your fingers stiffen. Breakfast delays. Water stays cold. Everyone grows irritable. With flame, the house begins once more to tolerate the people inside it. I have always found it strange that the founding year of a nation is so often imagined as pure speech, as if people spent all of 1789 standing in excellent light, discussing liberty with perfect posture. In reality, most mornings begin like this, crouched before ash, hoping yesterday left enough heat to begin today. The Constitution may exist. George Washington may be stepping into office. But down here at floor level, history still smells like smoke and stubborn coals. At last, the kindling catches. The flame is small at first, embarrassed by its own existence, then stronger, then suddenly willing to commit. Warmth begins as promise before it becomes fact. Orange light reaches outward, and the room changes expression. A bowl becomes visible. A bench. A pair of shoes waiting by the door like stern, practical animals. A chest that stores nearly everything because furniture must earn its keep. Pegs with coats hanging from them. Lamp and patient. A Bible, perhaps. A spoon. A bucket. The whole economy of ordinary life arranged inside arm's reach. Now the household begins to wake in earnest. Someone rises and folds a blanket. Someone else coughs with the heavy, familiar cough of a chest that has known too much smoke and too many winters. A child rubs their eyes with the solemn misery, unique to children dragged from sleep before they have finished with it. No one asks whether the day should begin. The day is not a proposal. It is an arrival. Outside the threshold, the air bites differently depending on season. In winter, it hits the face like water made of needles. In summer, it already carries a damp heaviness, warm even before the sun clears the trees, the kind of air that promises sweat by mid-morning and delivers faithfully. You open the door and stand for a breath. The world feels close, less insulated than ours. Weather is not scenery here. It is management, warning, timetable, and mood. You hear the animals before you see them. Chickens scratching with needless intensity, as if every grain of dirt contains state secrets. A cow lowing from somewhere nearby. The shuffle of a horse in its stall or tied outside, impatient for feed or motion. Even in towns, animals are stitched into the soundscape. They are labor, food, transport, nuisance, a status, and alarm system all at once. Their smells join the morning without apology. The yard, lane, or street beyond the house is already telling the truth about the age. Mud in one season, dust in another, manure nearly all the time. Paths are worn by feet and wheels rather than perfected by planners. A nation may be inventing itself on paper, but its roads still resemble arguments between rain and dirt. You pause there on the threshold and let the first full breath of morning enter you. Wood smoke leaves the house with you. Damp air comes in. Somewhere, a neighbor is doing the same set of things you are doing. Stirring coals, pulling on wool, carrying a bucket, offering a half-awake prayer, cursing softly under their breath at a button that slipped away in the dark. This is one of the quiet truths of the time. Most lives here are not singular adventures. They are parallel efforts, shared routines repeated house by house, body by body, and already your mind is counting. Water, fire, animals, breakfast, children, tools, work, always work, though it changes its costume depending on where you stand in society. Even those who do not plow or hammer or scrub are tied to labor done by someone. The day is built from it. More unsettling still, and the source would insist on it. Much of the comfort available in this new country rests on lives that are not free. Before the sun has properly risen, enslaved people are already awake too, already moving, already carrying the weight that allows others to speak grandly of independence. The contradiction lives in the morning air, whether anyone names it or not. For now, though, we remain in this house with its beams and ash and waking breath. Your hands move automatically, straightening the blanket, lifting a pot, reaching for the bucket. You do not need a speech to tell you what matters first. You need heat. You need water. You need food enough to meet the day without trembling by noon. The grand language of the Republic hovers somewhere above this room like weather over a roof. It may matter later, but here, in the first pale hour, your life is measured in much smaller victories. A live ember, a full bucket, a dry pair of stockings, bread enough for breakfast, a child who wakes healthy, a roof that held through the rain, a body still willing to rise. That is how the morning truly begins, not with ceremony, but with sequence, not with confidence, but with practice. You have woken inside 1789 America, and what greets you first is not a dream of a nation. It is the intimate weight of a household already leaning towards survival. The fire has taken now. The room is no longer dark, only dim and brown and breathing. The house expects the rest of the day from you, and outside the light is growing stronger, revealing more of the world, a little at a time. So you gather yourself, touch the doorframe as you pass, and step fully into the material reality of the place, into the walls, the hearth, the rough furniture, the waiting clothes, the first meal, and the bucket that must soon be filled again. The house reveals itself more honestly once you are fully awake. At first light, it had been a shelter of shadows and necessity. Now, as the fire grows and the room steadies into view, it becomes what it truly is, a machine for survival built by tired hands and held together by attention. Not elegant, not comfortable in the modern sense, but stubborn. 1789 admires stubborn things. You move deeper into the room, or perhaps only turn around, because in a house like this there is often no deeper place to go. Space is arranged according to heat, labor, and storage rather than beauty. The walls are close, low ceilings trap warmth. Windows are few because glass costs money and breaks with no respect for your budget. Every design choice says the same thing in a different accent. Endure the season. Stretch the fuel. Keep the rain out. Protect the grain. Try not to burn. The hearth dominates everything. In some houses it rises in rough stone, blackened and wide-mouthed. In others it is smaller, but no less commanding. Pots hang nearby. Tools lean within reach. Ash rests in drifts that will be swept and still somehow never fully leave. Smoke climbs imperfectly. Fireplaces are useful, yes, but obedient, not exactly. They heat what they can. They lose much up the chimney. They stain beams. They catch soot. They threaten the very room they serve. That is why buckets of water or sand sit near the hearth, even when water itself is dear. You can tell what kind of household this is by the objects that have survived inside it. A table, heavy and scarred. Bench seating. Perhaps a chair or two, with backs if fortune has been kind. A chest that stores linens, tools, letters, clothing, and maybe a little vanity, all under one lid. Shelves with bowls, pewter, wooden trenchers, a jar of salt, some dried herbs, pegs carrying coats, a brew made from gathered stalks. Everything either works or becomes firewood eventually. Storage climbs upward as much as it spreads outward. Strings of onions, bunches of herbs, maybe strips of drying meat. Food hangs from rafters to escape pests, though pests are enterprising and often behave as if your entire home were built with their comfort in mind. Mice find gaps. Insects occupy summer with confidence. Cats earn their reputation honestly here, and perhaps a little smugly. Beds take up more room than seems reasonable until you remember how many functions sleep must serve. Rest, warmth, sickness, recovery, childbirth, company for guests. The bed is not a private island. It is a piece of household infrastructure. Ropes or slats beneath, straw mattress above, blankets folded with care because each one took labor to produce or purchase. Children may sleep together. Adults do too. Guests fit where they can. There is comfort in closeness, and there is also the simple fact that winter does not care for modern ideas of personal space. You look at the floor again and understand that the house teaches you how to move. Some boards are safer than others. Some spots nearer the door invite drafts. Some corners catch damp. If the floor is earth, it must be swept and smoothed. If it is wood, it must be watched for splinters, gaps, and warping. Rugs are rare enough to seem luxurious. More often the floor is bare, and your body learns the geography by repetition. Now let us turn back to the body, because after the room comes clothing, and clothing in this period is almost a second architecture. It encloses you, restricts you, supports you, protects you, and quietly reminds you what class you belong to, what work you are expected to do, and how much fabric your household can afford to lose to wear. Getting dressed is not an expression of endless possibility. It is an inventory of what has lasted. Linen lies closest to the skin for good reason. It takes sweat and can be washed more often than wool. Over it comes wool, the great patient servant of the 18th century. Warm, durable, stubbornly odorous when overworked, but better than most other options. In winter, it is mercy. In summer, it is compromise. Buttons might be wood, bone, cloth-covered, pewter if someone was lucky. A missing button is not a small failure. It shifts the whole day slightly out of ease. Stitches matter too. Seams split, hems fray, elbows thin. Then someone mends by candlelight, not because this is charming, but because fabric itself represents time converted into material. Nothing is thrown out while it can still serve as something smaller. Children wear cut-down versions of adult garments. A coat becomes a smaller coat, then perhaps a patched one, then perhaps an apron, then rags. There is a whole afterlife to cloth in this world. Even rags may become paper. The past continues to touch the skin in literal ways. Shoes wait by the door, heavy and unsympathetic. Leather, stiffened by use and weather. Soles thin enough that stones and ruts introduce themselves personally. In many cases, there is little difference between left and right, until the foot itself teaches the leather where to bend. You put them on because the outside world is rougher still, not because they promise pleasure. A hat matters more than a modern listener might expect. It keeps sun off, weather off, and judgment off, at least a little. Going out bareheaded can look careless. A brushed coat and repaired cuff may signal respectability better than actual freshness. Clean enough, intact enough, decent enough. These are meaningful thresholds in a world that does not expect perfection. And then there is the smell of clothing, which no polite historical overview can erase. Smoke, wool, a little body salt, maybe old rain, tallow candle, stable air if animals are kept near. None of this means people were indifferent. It means they lived inside materials that absorbed life very quickly and released it very slowly. Dressed now, you return to the hearth because breakfast does not appear by magic, and the day has no interest in waiting for appetite to become philosophical. Morning food in 1789 is not about culinary delight first. It is about enough. Enough fuel to carry the body into labor. Enough warmth to keep shivering from stealing strength. Enough familiarity to reassure the mind that the household still holds. Corn sits at the center of so many tables that it may as well be another member of the Republic. Mush, Johnny cakes, hoe cakes, porridge, meal baked or stirred into usefulness. If there is wheat bread, it may be dense, dark, and precious in its own way. Rye too. Bread depends on flour, time, fire, and the mood of the oven. You watch hands measure without measuring cups as we know them. A little more meal, a little less water, salt if available. A practiced eye for texture. Someone stirs. Someone slices what remains from yesterday. The meal often includes leftovers because reheating or reusing is common sense, not laziness. Cold stew in the morning is less romantic than a modern breakfast table, but more honest. If there is milk, it comes not from a chilled bottle, but from an animal whose needs must already have been met. Butter, if present, was earned through churning. Cheese through patience. Salted pork or bacon may appear if supplies and status allow. Its smell richer than its quantity. Meat at breakfast is not guaranteed. It is an event only in comparison to scarcity. And you do not eat as if lunch is waiting with clockwork certainty. Meals are opportunities caught when they can be. Midday food may be brief, delayed, or absent, depending on work. So breakfast often carries the emotional weight of security as much as nourishment. You eat because the body will be asked to spend what it has. Bowls are shared or few. Spoons are common. You sit, stand, or perch. Formality belongs to wealthier tables. Here the food must be moved from pot to stomach before the day drags too much of itself away. One of the details I always find quietly revealing is what people drink. Water exists. Yes. Water also carries risk. Wells are close to waste pits. Streams gather whatever the land gives them. So cider, small beer, and diluted spirits become ordinary, practical, safer in many cases than what sits at the bottom of a bucket. Children drink weak, fermented beverages too. The goal is not indulgence. The goal is to keep going without disaster. Nothing is wasted. That is the moral rhythm beneath every domestic act. Scraps go to animals. Bones may become broth. Grease is saved. Stale bread becomes something else later. Waste is not just impractical. It looks like a kind of character failure when resources are this hard-won. The food settles warmly, if not luxuriously. It brings the body back into agreement with the day. Not joy. Exactly. Readiness. A steadier pulse. Less chill. More capacity. And then, of course, water again. Always water. You take up the bucket because the household has already spent what little it could spare. Cooking needs water. Washing needs water. Animals need more of it than seems fair. So do people, though people usually lose the argument when labor animals are involved. If the well is near, that is mercy. If it is communal, then mornings carry little crossings of public life, greetings, glances, small judgments, weather talk. If it is private, but shallow, there is worry about seepage and drought. If it is a spring, then perhaps the walk is longer, but the water sweeter. Every source carries hope and suspicion together. The bucket itself matters. Wood hoops, iron bands, a worn handle polished by palms, rope fibers rough against skin. You lower it and hear the delayed splash from below, a sound that feels promising and ominous at once. Wells are dark mouths. They give life upward and they keep their own secrets. Pulling a full bucket up is physical knowledge. The shoulders understand before the mind comments. The rope rubs. The arms work. Water appears at the rim with that quiet, sloshing brightness that makes even plain water look momentarily luxurious. You carry it carefully because every spill is another task waiting to happen. Inside again, the bucket settles near the hearth or against the wall. Some of it will be heated, some used cool, some saved, some gone almost at once into cooking or cups or the basin used for quick washing. Storage vessels wait. Ceramic crocks, wooden tubs, metal pails, all with flaws and personalities of their own. Water picks up tastes from them. You learn to accept the world through taste more generously than modern people do. Hands and faces may be washed, not lavishly, efficiently. A cloth, a basin, cold shock in winter, relief in summer. Full body bathing is another matter, and far less frequent. Constrained by labor, foil, modesty, weather, and access. Still, undergarments are changed and washed when possible. Linen carries part of the burden of hygiene. Soap appears if the household has made any. Harsh stuff, often, born from lye and fat and no interest whatsoever in being gentle to delicate skin. It cleans. It also roughens hands into honesty. You rinse bowls with care, always aware that more water must be fetched later, and again after that. The day is a series of disappearances from the bucket. Even the animals remind you of water's hierarchy. Chickens find puddles where you least want them. A horse drinks with the seriousness of a creature convinced all available resources are rightfully its own. Cows require regularity. The household must think ahead, not by days only, but by trips to the well. If you fail at water, everything else begins to fail behind it. So the morning fills itself. The house has been checked, the clothes secured, breakfast managed, water fetched and partly spent already. The fire burns steadily now, not just as promise, but as fact. Outside the day grows brighter and noisier. The room behind you smells of cornmeal, smoke, wool, and damp wood beginning to dry. The bucket is lighter than it should be. The body is warmer than it was. And that is the point at which domestic life in 1789 reveals its truest form. It is not separate from history. It is history with its shoes on. History carrying a bucket. History patching a cuff. History stirring mush over a live flame while listening for a child. A neighbor. A cough. A storm. A woof. An ember. The house has done its first duty. It has kept you through the night and brought you into the day. Now, it releases you, gently, if you are fortunate, into the louder world outside, where the street, the yard, the tools, the mud, the animals, and all the other forms of labor are already waiting. Outside, the day has fully found its voice. The moment you leave the shelter of the hearth and doorway behind, the world stops feeling contained and begins to feel shared, exposed, and slightly louder than your half-awake mind would prefer. Streets in 1789 do not hum. They clatter. They groan. They call out. Hooves strike packed earth with a rhythm that is almost musical until a wagon wheel catches in a rut and turns the tune into complaint. Chickens scatter as if pursued by private catastrophe. Dogs bark with conviction that exceeds evidence. Human voices pass over and around all of it, sharp in cool air, softer in heat, but always present. If you live in a town, the road beneath you is not a road in the modern sense. It is dirt shaped by repetition. Rain turns it to mud thick enough to steal shoes. Dry weather makes it dusty enough to coat hems, cuffs, throats, and timbers. Ruts harden into traps. Manure lies where the animals left it because animals and people share the same lanes with very little interest in pretension. In some places there are boards set down as walkways, raised just enough to suggest mercy, but they warp, slick over, and end abruptly, as though even the boards themselves have lost confidence. You step carefully. Everyone does. A twisted ankle is not a minor inconvenience here. It is lost labor, pain, delay. Maybe worse if the wrong fall happens in the wrong season. The body is managed with constant practical caution because the body is the household's most valuable tool and the least replaceable. The smells outside layer themselves with a boldness no one bothers apologizing for. Horse sweat, smoke, wet earth. Fish if the market is near. Cabbage, leather, brewing cider. Human waste where drainage is poor. Bread if you are lucky enough to pass a baker early. Iron if a blacksmith is already at work. That hot metallic scent mixing with coal smoke in a way that makes the whole street feel slightly singed. It is not a clean world in the modern sense, though people do not experience it as filth so much as atmosphere. This is simply what active life smells like when nearly everything is done close to the body and out in the open. You notice quickly that sound here is social information. A bell ringing at the wrong hour can draw heads from every doorway. A cry of fire changes the quality of the air before anyone even explains it. A vendor calling out what he sells does not merely advertise. It tells the street what sort of day it is becoming. Fish means boats came in. Hot pies mean flour was spared and an oven was willing. A crier reading a notice in a practiced voice can shift the whole town's mood in a matter of minutes. News does not arrive silently. It arrives through lungs. Children cross the street with the confidence of creatures who have never considered that the world should make room for them. They weave around wagons, through chickens, under the gaze of adults who are working hard enough to trust children to become competent by necessity. One carries kindling, another a basket. Another has clearly been told to do something and is moving with the exaggerated seriousness of a child who wants the world to know that this errand matters very much. Play and labor mingle so closely here that they often wear the same face. As you move farther into the morning, the town or settlement reveals how public life truly is. Doors stand open. Workshops breathe their work into the lane. From one building comes the repetitive ring of hammer on metal. From another, the long tearing song of a saw. A cooper's shop smells of fresh cut wood and damp staves. A shoemaker bends over leather in a patch of workable light. A seamstress or washerwoman works close to home but not hidden from view. Domestic and commercial space blur into one another because survival has no use for elegant boundaries. You pass faces that know one another by sight, if not by name. That matters. Reputation is not an abstract ornament. It is currency, safety, and opportunity stitched together. A person known to keep fair measures may sell more easily. A person known to drink too much, fight too quickly, or leave debts behind carries those stories around like burrs on their coat. Privacy was scarce in the house. It is rarer still once you step into shared air. And yet there is energy here too. A real one. Not the grand staged energy of a parade, but the muscular energy of many lives beginning work at once. It is the sound of a country that is technically new and materially old, still built out of wood, mud, rope, cloth, sweat, routine, and human noise. If you were standing here with me, you would feel at once how unfinished everything is. Not just the nation, but the roads, the rules, the buildings, even the confidence. Nothing feels permanent enough to stop being watched. Then work takes hold properly, and the world narrows. This is one of the great truths of the period. Labor does not simply occupy part of the day. It is the architecture of the day. There is no neat separation between life and work, because work is what allows life to continue into tomorrow. Even rest is often only the brief absence of a task before another takes its place. If you are tied to the land, then the body bends towards soil almost immediately. Fields do not care what was discussed in Philadelphia. Crops answer to weather, pests, timing, and relentless attention. Corn must be checked, fences repaired, weeds pulled, animals fed before they begin composing loud political opinions of their own. A cow can be patient only in stories. In real life, she insists, Chickens require a little less strength and a little more tolerance. Pigs, when present, operate as if sabotage were their spiritual calling. The work itself is repetitive in a way that changes the mind. Ua, lift, carry, tea, feed, turn, scrape, repeat. Long stretches pass with very few words because the body learns the sequence and the mind moves elsewhere or nowhere. This is not leisure exactly, but there are moments when labor becomes so familiar that it permits thought to drift. You notice the weather. You listen for crows. You remember who borrowed a tool 3 days ago and has not yet returned it. You think about whether the flour will last. You think about nothing for several minutes, and that, in its own way, is a kind of relief. If you work a trade instead, the day is not easier, only differently demanding. A blacksmith stands in heat that seems determined to enter the bones permanently. Each hammer blow runs through the arm and shoulder. Sparks leap. Iron changes color, with moods more predictable than people, and still more dangerous if misunderstood. A cooper shapes wood with the accuracy of someone who knows that a barrel either holds or does not. A cabinet maker, printer, rope maker, wheelwright, tanner, each lives inside a skill that asks for both endurance and precision. A mistake wastes material. Waste is expensive. Therefore, fatigue is never allowed to excuse carelessness for very long. Women's labor fills the day just as completely, though the world has a habit of pretending not to see it unless something goes wrong. Cooking is not one event, but a chain of events stretched from dawn through evening. Fires are watched, bread mixed, scraps reused, broth coaxed from bones, vegetables cut, food preserved, dried, salted, smoked, stored. Clothing is washed, wrung, dried, patched. Children are fed, corrected, comforted, put to use. Water is fetched again, and again after that. Floors swept, dishes rinsed, soap managed, needles threaded in low light. The household runs on labor that leaves little visible monument once the meal is eaten and the garment mended. But if it stops for even a day, the whole structure begins to show strain. There is a temptation in modern minds to imagine some clean distinction between productive work and domestic work. 1789 laughs at that distinction without bothering to explain the joke. The home produces survival. It is a workshop, kitchen, nursery, laundry, infirmary, storeroom, and negotiation table, all in one. The person stirring mush is doing economic work. The person mending shirts is extending resources. The person preserving food is fighting winter months in advance. None of it is ornamental. Children are absorbed into this world early, very early. A child of 5 or 6 may already carry useful responsibility, not complete responsibility, perhaps, but real enough that the household notices if it is neglected. Watching younger children, gathering eggs, bringing in chips for the fire, scaring birds off crops, running messages, learning the mood of a horse, the bite of cold water, the weight of a bucket too full for comfort. Childhood exists. Certainly, there is laughter. There are games. There is mischief. But childhood does not sit apart from labor and observe it from a safe little balcony. It grows up inside labor and learns the steps by imitation. By midday, your body has usually found one of two states. Either it has settled into work with a kind of resigned fluency, or it has begun speaking to you in aches that will only grow more articulate as the afternoon continues. The meal at breakfast sits farther away now. Hunger returns, though not always with a proper answer waiting for it. Midday eating may be bread, cold leftovers, a little cheese, cider, maybe salted meat if things are going well, maybe not if they are not. Work does not pause ceremoniously to honor appetite. Food fits around labor, not the other way around. You look around and begin to see more clearly the social arrangement hidden inside all this ordinary motion. Enslaved people move through fields, kitchens, workshops, and yards, not as occasional figures, but as a foundational force. In the southern states, this is unmistakable. Tobacco, rice, indigo, and the comforts built on them carry the mark of constrained bodies from first light onward. Even where slavery is less visibly concentrated, the economy is still shaped by it. There are meals prepared by hands without freedom, goods transported by hands without security, children tended by hands whose own children may be vulnerable to separation. This is not a side note beneath the day. It is inside the day, structuring it, feeding it, staining it. The contradiction is everywhere, and yet so often made to sound invisible by those who benefit from it. You hear the language of liberty in taverns and public rooms, but outside in the lane, you can also hear orders given as if some people were born to spend their bodies for the convenience of others. That dissonance may not stop the street from functioning, but it lives underneath it like a stone under the wheel. The wheel rolls anyway. The stone remains. Free Black Americans inhabit another difficult space entirely, moving through the same world with freedom that is real and fragile at once. In some towns, they work as sailors, artisans, laborers, cooks, laundresses. They build communities, churches, support networks. They also carry documents, quotient, and the knowledge that freedom in practice can be questioned by a stranger in a moment. Ordinary movement acquires an extra layer of vigilance. Reputation must be even cleaner. Speech even more measured. A simple journey can turn complex if challenged by the wrong person in the wrong mood. Indigenous people remain present too, far more present than later comfortable stories often suggest. Trade paths, place names, crop knowledge, hunting practice, geography itself all carry indigenous influence, whether settlers acknowledge it gladly, reluctantly, or not at all. In some regions, native communities are near enough to trade directly, to negotiate, to resist, to observe the new republic, expanding across old ground with a patience born of having seen many promises made and unmade. Everyday life takes place on contested land, even when the household is too busy to say it aloud. Back in the immediate world of the afternoon, the body keeps moving. That is what strikes you most from inside the period. The absence of clean stops. A field task gives way to a repair. A repair to feeding animals. Feeding animals to chopping wood. Chopping wood to cleaning tools. Cooking to washing. Washing to mending. Mending to setting something to dry. Everything links. Completion is rare. Progress is the more realistic word. There are, however, moments of brief human relief. A cup passed around. A joke that lands harder than it should because everyone is already tired. A shared glance when a chicken escapes in precisely the direction least useful to everyone involved. I promised you a touch of ordinary humor, and history really does allow it. There is something wonderfully democratic about a goose making fools of all classes equally. By late afternoon, the light begins to angle lower and the body feels worked through. Not in a glorious way, in a cumulative one. Sweat dried once and returned. Dust clinging to stockings and hems. Hands roughened anew, backs beginning to complain in a language no one mistakes. The air changes too. Even before evening, sound softens just slightly. The street remains alive, but the day loses its brightest edge. This is often when the invisible arithmetic of the household becomes most obvious. What was done? What was not? How much water remains? Whether the flour barrel looks shallower than it should? Whether the fence can wait another day? Whether the child's cough is nothing or something? Whether the pig looks too clever for the latch it has been given? These small calculations form the background mathematics of ordinary life, and there is no real guarantee waiting behind them. No safety net hidden in the wall. A bad harvest, a broken limb, a fever, a lost horse, a burned roof. Any of these can push a family from stability into desperate improvisation with very little warning. That is why effort feels so constant. Work is not simply about earning. It is about maintaining the narrow bridge over uncertainty. As the sun lowers, you sense the first shift toward evening. Not yet rest, but the possibility of eventually becoming less useful for an hour or two. Tools are gathered, animals checked once more, fires prepared for the next meal, water measured with the eye in mind. The street outside thins a little, though not by much. Voices drop. Wheels pass less often. The smells of cooking begin to replace some of the smells of labor. You pause for a breath and realize that the day has changed you already, not through drama, but through accumulation. You are more tired, more alert, more aware of material reality than you were at dawn. The house will take you back soon, not as sanctuary exactly, but as the place where labor changes shape and continues by other means. And that is where we will go next, into the later afternoon and evening world where the market, money, food, faith, and the slower arrival of news reveal the deeper fabric of life in this uncertain young republic. By the time the afternoon begins to loosen, the market and the household draw toward one another like two halves of the same breath. What is bought must be carried home. What is sold must justify the labor that produced it. What is owed must be remembered. In 1789, money exists, certainly, but it behaves less like a stable system and more like a series of local agreements held together by trust, scarcity, and the stubborn will to keep exchange moving. You arrive at a market, if there is one near enough, with more intention than leisure. Coins may jingle in a pocket or small purse, but rarely in abundance. Spanish, silver, British pieces still in circulation. Local paper promises, copper cents, foreign coin valued by weight or familiarity rather than patriotic neatness. The young republic is still financially untidy. A coin's official value matters, but so does whether the person across from you recognizes it, trusts it, and is desperate enough to accept it. Barter fills the gaps with almost cheerful persistence. Eggs for nails, labor for shoes, butter for cloth, a repaired tool in exchange for grain later in the week. Debt trails through the market like an invisible second crowd. Everyone owes someone. Everyone is waiting on someone else. The arithmetic is not merely numerical. It is social. If you fail to pay, you do not simply disrupt an account. You damage a relationship that is often costlier. Goods are laid out plainly. Baskets on a table. Fish on boards. Apples in crates. Cloth folded with as much dignity as possible. Candles. Salt if fortune smiles. Tobacco. Needles. Pots. Dried herbs. There is little packaging and less performance. People come to buy what they need, though they are not immune to wanting what they do not strictly require. A brighter ribbon, a better knife, a little sugar. Desire lives even in frugal ages. It simply dresses more modestly. Women sell here too, and often eggs, butter, bread, vegetables, preserved goods, spun yarn, cloth, little incomes gathered from domestic labor and translated into household survival. The line between home and economy is paper thin. A loaf sold at market may be the difference between lamp oil and darkness, between a patch of fabric and another month in a torn sleeve. Arguments over price are rarely theatrical, but they are common. A measure is examined. A weight is doubted. A seller praises quality with a seriousness that may be entirely justified or mildly imaginative. Buyers learn to look, smell, press, judge. Rotten fruit can be hidden beneath good fruit as easily in the 18th century as today, which is oddly comforting in its own way. Human beings remain beautifully consistent in certain small deceits. Trust, once lost, lingers. That is why market life is not merely commercial. It is reputational theater, performed without script. A fair trader may thrive. A dishonest one may find future customers suddenly too busy to stop. Community memory acts as regulation where formal oversight remains thin. News travels through the market as efficiently as goods. Perhaps more efficiently. Who is ill? Who died? Which road is passable? What a neighboring town said about attacks. Whether a ship came in, whether a preacher is coming through, whether prices for salt or iron have turned unfriendly. You listen while pretending not to. Everyone does. The market is not only where food changes hands, it is where reality is updated. And still the update comes slowly. That is another great difference in the texture of life. Information arrives by voice, horse, letter, newspaper, traveler. It does not swarm. It drifts in. It sits with you. It may be wrong. It may already be outdated. Yet because it is not constantly replaced, each piece has a little more weight. People chew over news longer when they cannot summon a fresher version every few moments. A newspaper, when it reaches you, is a dense and precious thing. One sheet may pass through many hands. Read aloud in taverns, at tables, near shop doors. The paper does not separate the nation from the household. It ties them together awkwardly. Reports of government, argument, debt, treaties, appointments, all arriving in a room where someone is also stirring stew and someone else is mending trousers. Politics never appears in a vacuum. It appears while life continues around it. That is why the great public language of the age often feels oddly thin when measured against the thickness of domestic reality. The Constitution exists. Washington takes office. Debates over power, taxation, federal authority, and the shape of the republic continue. Yet for many ordinary people, these matters arrive blurred by distance and filtered through immediate need. A leaking roof is not less real because a constitutional question is more elegant. Bread still outranks theory when children are hungry. Political talk often belongs to taverns, to gatherings after labor, to men with enough time or status to argue. But even then, it is shaped by practical concern. Roads, taxes, land, debts, militia service. Who has too much power? Who wants more? Who speaks well, and who can be trusted? Abstract ideals become local once they pass through tired mouths. Faith is woven into all of this as both structure and atmosphere. Church may stand at the center of town, or worship may gather in simpler meeting houses or homes. Depending on region and denomination, attendance matters not only spiritually but socially. Who is present? Who is absent? Who sings? Who weeps? Who speaks too boldly? Who sits in silence? Community watches. Community remembers. Services are long, often physically uncomfortable, and morally comprehensive. A sermon is not a short weekly encouragement. It is instruction, warning, interpretation, endurance, and sometimes an attempt to explain why the world feels as hard as it does. Hard benches, cold rooms in winter, children fidgeting, adults listening with varying degrees of conviction and fatigue. Faith is not always ecstasy. Often, it is simply repetition strong enough to hold a community together. Prayer enters daily life without fanfare. Before meals, at the edge of sickness, before a journey, during fear, during gratitude. It provides rhythm where certainty is absent. It also shapes the language of hardship. People speak of trials, blessings, providence, judgment. These words do not erase suffering. They frame it. That matters in a world where so much remains unpredictable. And unpredictability includes health. Always health. If the day has not yet reminded you of the body's fragility, evening often will. Once labor slows, the aches become easier to hear. A cut on the finger, the deep pull in the lower back, the cough that has lasted a little too long. In 1789, illness is never very far away, and medicine is a field of confidence, improvisation, partial knowledge, and occasional genuine help. Doctors exist, yes. Some are trained formally, some by apprenticeship. Some seem to possess equal parts intelligence and terrifying enthusiasm. Treatments may include bleeding, purging, blistering, mercury, laudanum, poultices, herbs, rest when possible, and pain, whether wanted or not. Even successful care often looks alarming to modern eyes. The household, therefore, becomes the first hospital. A mother, aunt, neighbor, or experienced elder often sees the patient before any physician does. Sickness alters the rhythm of a home quickly. Someone must heat more water. Someone must sit up at night. Someone must take over another's tasks. Illness is never individual for long. It spreads work even when it does not spread disease. This is especially true for children, whose fevers and frailty haunt the period in a quiet, constant way. Many families know loss too well to speak of it dramatically. They watch carefully, hope cautiously, and continue because there is no version of life that allows full pause. As afternoon thins toward evening, food again takes command. Not breakfast now, but the more substantial meal, if circumstances permit. Supper has to be made from what remains, what was preserved, what was bought, what can be stretched. A stew may gather fragments of the day into one pot. Beans, salt pork, onions, turnip, greens, cornbread, cider. If the household has more, the meal broadens. If it has less, the pot grows more philosophical and the bowls less full. Preservation practices are a daily defense against the future. Salted meat hanging, herbs drying, apples stored, cabbages kept, grain protected from moisture and pests, butter churned, cheese set, vinegar used for pickling. Every preserved object on a shelf is a conversation with winter months not yet arrived. To preserve food is to challenge uncertainty in advance. And there is something deeply moving in that quiet, long-term courage. Children remain folded into the evening work just as they were into the morning. They fetch, carry, shale, stir, watch younger siblings, learn by proximity. Schooling, where it exists, is irregular and secondary to household need. Reading may come through the Bible or family instruction. Writing, if learned, is useful. Arithmetic, if learned well, may change a future a little. But for many children, competence begins with labor, not literacy. They are expected to become helpful long before anyone asks whether they are carefree. And then there are the human realities, the republic most wanted not to speak about, while speaking endlessly of freedom. Enslaved people continue to labor through evening in many regions, often after others have shifted from field work to food and relative ease. Their time is not their own. Their fatigue is used by others as infrastructure. The ordinary beauty of shared family supper in one house may depend directly on coercion endured in another building only yards away. This is how a society teaches itself not to look directly at what sustains it, by making exploitation routine enough to be called normal. Free Black families also move into evening with caution and care, building community where they can, carrying papers and reputations, creating churches, households, mutual aid, and fragile spaces of security within a wider system that resists granting full safety. Their freedom is lived rather than generously recognized. It requires steadiness, strategy, and memory. Indigenous communities, too, continue beyond the edges of settler imagination, trading, adapting, resisting, preserving ceremony, knowledge, and kinship on land the new nation is already trying to narrate as if it were simply available. The day in 1789 never truly belongs to one people alone, no matter how often power pretends otherwise. As dusk finally comes on, leisure appears in small, believable forms, not a grand release, just a loosening. A body skits rather than stands. A cup is lifted. A song begins. Someone hums before realizing they have started. A fiddle might come out if one is present. Cards, perhaps. A story retold. The same joke that has improved with age and repetition. Leisure here is communal because solitude is scarce and because fatigue prefers company when it can get it. Alcohol belongs to this part of the day too, though it belongs to many parts of the day. Cider, small beer, rum, whiskey, depending on means and region. It is practical, social, medicinal, and sometimes excessive, but ordinary far more often than scandalous. Water cannot always be trusted. Fermented drink often can. A cup passed hand to hand creates a softness in conversation. Not always wisdom, but at least warmth. The tavern, if you go, is not separate from life. It is a compressed version of it. Business, rumor, politics, argument, relief, appetite, all in one warm lit room smelling of drink, damp wool, smoke, and humanity in close quarters. Travelers bring stories. Locals bring grievances. Someone exaggerates. Someone listens as if each word were coin. Someone loses at cards with dignity. Someone loses it without dignity. Then tomorrow they will all still need to function as neighbors. Night outside is deeper than a modern person expects. Once candles are spared and shutters close, darkness becomes a presence rather than an absence. The sky clears and stars appear in astonishing numbers, as if the heavens have suddenly remembered their role in the scene. Weather feels close again. Wind matters. Rain matters. Frost matters. They are not little atmospheric details. They are tomorrow's conditions already leaning toward you through the dark. Inside the house, fire becomes ruler once more. Candles are used carefully. Wicks trimmed. Tallow smelled. Shadows enlarge ordinary objects. Evening tasks fit the available light. Mending. Shelling beans. Quiet repairs. Talking in lower voices. The house contracts around the living center of flame. Beyond it, the room grows uncertain. The day yields not because every task is finished, but because darkness has made some of them foolish to continue. Privacy remains scarce. Sleep will be shared. Breath, coughs, shifting blankets, is familiar noises, all part of the communal life of night. The house settles. Boards answering cold. Beams adjusting. Embers speaking occasionally in soft red clicks. Animals outside quiet. Then stir. Then quiet again. The world does not go silent. It simply narrows to sounds that mean something. And in that narrowing, one final truth about 1789 becomes clear. Ordinary life is not heroic from moment to moment. It is repetitive, negotiated, physically demanding, morally compromised, socially intimate, and profoundly material. Yet it is also threaded with belonging. Meals shared. Songs remembered. Buckets passed. Stories repeated. Care given in practical forms. Hope imagined in small, measurable increments. A bitter harvest. A sounder roof. A child taught to read. A debt finally paid. More wood stacked before winter. These are modest dreams, but modest dreams are often the most durable. They ask less of fortune and more of patience. So as the evening deepens and the house draws its people inward again, you can feel the whole day gathered behind you now. The cold awakening, the rough clothes, the mud street, the noise of labor, the thin money, the market, the sermon, the aching body, the political talk half heard, the preservation of food, the shared drink, the careful dark. None of it spectacular. All of it essential. And now the world begins to quiet enough for the later thoughts to enter. Thoughts about safety, about illness, about fire, about old age, about the future children may inherit, about whether rest is possible when the same work will begin again at dawn. Those thoughts belong to the night, and that is where we are going next, into the final hours when the house settles, the body yields, and the age reveals itself most gently in the dark. Night has settled fully now, and with it comes a kind of honesty that daylight often keeps politely distracted. During the day, there is always another task close at hand, another bucket to fill, another fence to mend, another child to guide away from foolishness and toward usefulness. But when the fire is reduced to a careful glow and voices soften because there is no sense in wasting strength on loudness, the mind begins to notice other things. It notices the shape of the room, the closeness of bodies, the breadth of the house itself. It notices how little of your life is ever truly yours alone. Privacy in 1789 is not absent. Exactly, but it is thin, improvised, and often brief enough to feel like a borrowed coat rather than a possession. The house that kept out wind and rain all day now gathers everyone into itself with a kind of stern intimacy. Beds are shared because warmth matters more than solitude. Children sleep close together, sometimes with feet where they ought not to be, and elbows apparently directed by mischief, even in sleep. Adults sleep near one another because rooms are few and walls are thinner than pride. A guest may be given space that no one truly has to spare, because hospitality remains more honorable than comfort. You lie down and feel immediately how near the others are. A shift of mattress stuffing under one person becomes a motion felt by another. A cough at the far side of the room still belongs to everyone because everyone hears it. Someone turns over. Someone sighs. Somewhere in the room, a child briefly mutters from a dream and settles again. No sound is private. No breath fully belongs to one person. It changes how people think and speak. Sensitive conversations are delayed until chance permits, if chance permits at all. Hard truths are folded into practical language. Affection may show itself in labor more often than in words, because words travel too easily in shared spaces. Grief, too, is hard to conceal. So is anger. The house hears everything, then gives it back to the family in memory. If you were standing here with me in the dark, you would feel something strange and almost paradoxical about it. There is less privacy than most modern people can imagine, yet there is perhaps less loneliness too. To be alone is rare enough that it must be sought on purpose. In a yard at dawn, on the walk to fetch water, during a brief errand, in the quiet act of chopping something small by yourself before others rise. Solitude is a pocket, not a country. Most of life is lived within hearing distance of another soul. That closeness can comfort, and it can strain. You know quickly who is restless in sleep, who snores, who talks in dreams, who wakes at the slightest sound, who rises silently to check the fire because some old fear of losing the house to flame never fully loosens its grip. You know who is ill before they admit it, because you hear the breathing change at night. You know who is worried because they do not settle at the usual hour. You know who is grieving because silence sits differently around them, heavier somehow. as if even darkness is careful not to disturb it. Children learn this shared life so early that they rarely question it. Their sense of self grows inside a group rather than apart from it. They are corrected in public, praised in public, fed in company, put to sleep in company. Secrets are difficult things for them, and so they become skilled in another art, in tone, in glances, in the half-sentence, in understanding what is meant even when it is not spoken plainly. That sort of listening becomes part of character. In a world of close quarters, the unspoken is often louder than the spoken. There are also practical reasons privacy remains scarce. Furniture is limited. Rooms serve multiple purposes. A bedchamber may also store clothing, tools, linens, baskets, dried herbs, and anything else with no better place to live. A corner cleared for one purpose in the morning may serve another by night. Space is not designed around inner life. It is designed around survival, weather, labor, and the economics of heating small areas rather than large. Even wealthier households, though they may boast more rooms and thicker walls, still live closer to one another than most modern households would tolerate without mutiny. And then there is the simple fact that private thought itself behaves differently in a world like this. You do not narrate yourself constantly. There is less opportunity for long internal rehearsals of who you are, independent of what you do. Identity is tied to roles so tightly that to imagine yourself outside, it can feel almost like stepping off a path into deep woods. You are daughter, son, father, wife, hired hand, apprentice, widow, carpenter, seamstress, cook, field worker, child minding another child. The self is braided into usefulness, affection, duty, and reputation. It does not always ask to be seen separately. Yet now and then, in darkness, a quieter self stirs. It notices the house settling. It notices the faint smell of ash and old wool. It notices the ache under the shoulder blade that did not trouble you 5 years ago and now returns every cold evening like an old acquaintance with no regard for manners. It notices how tired you are. Not dramatically tired, not poetically, just deeply and physically tired. Tired enough that the mattress stuffed with straw and compromise still feels like mercy. Aging enters the room gently at first, then never quite leaves. In 1789, there is no ceremony that marks the end of work and the beginning of rest as a separate life. No retirement waits with a chair and a pension and a puzzled gardener. The body simply changes, and the work changes with it if the household is fortunate enough to allow that adjustment. Strong backs become advising voices. Quick hands become careful hands. Heavy tasks give way to lighter ones, but rarely to nothing. Older people remain woven into the household because there is nowhere else for them to go. And because, more importantly, they remain needed. Memory itself is labor. To know which field floods first after a hard winter, which cow births badly, which family on the next road can be trusted with a loan and which cannot, which medicine once helped in a fever year, which roof beam should not be leaned on. All of that is practical wealth. An elder carries seasons inside the mind, the way a young person carries firewood in the arms. One kind of strength replaces another, though the replacement does not make the losses painless. You see aging in hands before almost anywhere else. Fingers stiffen, knuckles swell. Needles become harder to thread near dusk. Fine print in a Bible or newspaper drifts farther from the face and still refuses clarity. Stares become something negotiated rather than ignored. The cold no longer feels like a condition outside the body, but like a slow visitor who settles in the joints and is offensively difficult to remove. Older bodies move with more intention because haste threatens balance, and balance once lost can become a season of pain. There is dignity in this, but not romance. It is hard work to grow old in a world built on constant physical demand. Pride complicates everything. Older men and women push themselves longer than comfort advises because becoming a burden is one of the private terrors of the age. To be fed by others without contributing, if one can still manage to contribute, feels almost shameful. So they mend. Shell beans, zod herbs, watch children, steer pots, guide younger hands, sharpen memory into usefulness, and keep going for as long as the day allows. Death, because it has lived near the household all along, is not an abstract guest either. It does not necessarily arrive tonight, of course, but older people know its habits. They have seen children taken by fever, women by childbirth, men by accident, cold, infection, weather, horses, bad water, bad luck, and pure human folly. That knowledge does not make death less sad. It makes it less surprising. Wills are simple where they exist. Possessions are few enough to name without much poetry. A kist, a Bible, a kettle, a shawl, a bedrobe, a horse if fortune was ever generous. Practical things, useful things, things that will keep serving long after the hands that use them have quieted. Lying here in the dark, you begin to understand that this closeness between people, this lack of privacy, this shared breathing and shared worry, is part of what makes old age possible at all. No institutions stand ready to collect the frail. Families carry them, imperfectly, lovingly, sometimes resentfully, often all at once. It is beautiful and exhausting and human in the least polished way possible. The night deepens another shade. Outside, an animal shifts. Inside, someone wakes briefly to check the fire and returns to bed with the practiced caution of a person who has done so hundreds of times. Fire remains the quiet sovereign of every evening. It warmed supper, lit the room, softened boots by the hearth, dried cloth, heated water, and now, in near darkness, it waits banked low, still useful, still dangerous, still requiring respect. That is one of the most persistent truths of this world. Comfort and catastrophe often occupy the same glowing stones. No one in 1789 forgets fire for very long. They may fail it by accident. They may grow tired and careless and pay dearly, but they do not forget it. The stories are too common. A spark caught in dry straw. A chimney lined with soot, suddenly turning murderous. A candle nudged by a sleeve, or a child, or the simple fact that tired hands make poor judges of space. Houses are wood. Streets in towns are wood and pitch and hope. One blaze can become many before the first bucket is halfway full. That knowledge shapes evening ritual. Water remains close. Ashes are checked. Embers are spread or covered in careful ways. Candles are snuffed with more seriousness than one might expect from such small flames. Even in sleep, part of the household remains alert to smell before sight, to the wrong sound in the right hour. There is no smoke detector to take up the watch. The family itself becomes the detector. Its noses, ears, and old fears. Honestly, there is something almost moving in how much responsibility can rest inside ordinary gestures. A person pressing the last glowing coals together before bed is not merely ending the day. That person is guarding tomorrow's breakfast, tomorrow's warmth, tomorrow's woes, tomorrow's shirt hanging on its peg. Such a tiny act, such an absurdly large consequence. And because the consequences are so large, the mind does not fully surrender, even when the body does. Sleep in this period is often light around the edges. You sink, yes. Exhaustion sees to that. But you also listen for a child coughing too long, for a horse becoming too agitated in the yard, for a storm pressing in, for rain finding a weakness in the roof, for the strange silence that means the wind has changed, for the stranger sound that means perhaps someone is outside where no one ought to be. Night sounds become a language of their own. The horse shifts weight. The dog barks once with commitment, then perhaps again if the matter truly deserves escalation. Chickens murmur in their roost. A board creaks as the house cools. Wind runs a hand over the outer wall. Someone down the road laughs late, which will become tomorrow's small topic if repeated often enough. In summer, insects stitch the darkness together with one continuous thread of sound. In winter, the world can go so still, it feels as if the cold itself is listening. You drift and rise and drift again. This in-between state belongs to the age as much as the shared bed and the banked fire. There are no glowing numbers by the bedside. No little blue light of unnecessary information. Time at night is measured by feel, by embers, by moonlight, by the body's estimate of how long it has been since the last waking. Thoughts move differently without clocks. Slower, perhaps, or maybe simply less interrupted. And in these slow thoughts, the future sometimes appears. Not the grand national future men debate aloud, but the household future, the one built of roofs, isti, harvests, shoes for growing children. A daughter may be able to learn more letters. A son, perhaps spared one season of illness. A little money saved. One more acre, rented or bought. One debt finally reduced enough not to wake beside you every night like another breathing presence. Hope here is modest because modest hope survives disappointment better. People do dream of bigger changes, of moving west, of acquiring land, of better work, of a daughter marrying kindly rather than merely adequately, of a son not crushed beneath the same labor as his father. But the language of these hopes remains practical. No one says they seek fulfillment. They say they hope for a better harvest, for stronger timber, for a healthier cow, for a road improved enough to reach market before the apples bruise to sadness in their baskets. It is almost tender, the scale on which improvement is imagined. History books, like trumpet blasts and declarations, real lives prefer smaller miracles. A dry cellar, a child recovering, a roof holding, enough beans laid by, a pair of shoes that survives another season. These are the ambitions that hum in the dark. As sleep finally starts pulling more steadily, aching, privacy, fear, and hope all gather into one soft understanding. Life in 1789 is shared more than chosen, endured more than optimized, and measured less by personal expression than by continuity. The great achievement of an ordinary household is not happiness in the loud modern sense. It is persistence with some warmth left in it. It is care that survives fatigue. It is keeping fire low and safe. It is listening for danger and still allowing the body to rest. So you lie there now with the house breathing around you, the old and young gathered under one imperfect roof, and you let the darkness be a little gentler than the day was. There is nothing more required of you in this hour, only to listen for a little while longer, then let the listening blur into sleep, carrying with it the rough affection of closeness, the stern comfort of routine, and the fragile, steady belief that dawn, however cold and ordinary, will come again at some indistinct hour, not fully night and not yet the beginning of tomorrow. Your mind loosens from the practical worries of the house and drifts toward another part of the age, the way time itself feels when information travels slowly, when authority stays close to the body, and when the future is imagined in inches rather than miles. It is a strange calm, this late hour thinking, not because the world is safe, but because for a few minutes, nothing more can be done about its dangers. The first thing you become aware of is how slowly news moves in 1789, and how that slowness changes the shape of human thought. During the day, a traveler might have passed through. A letter might have been mentioned. Someone at market may have heard of a death, an election, a bad road, an Indian raid far off, a ship delayed, a new tariff, a sermon preached with unusual ferocity 2 counties over. But even the most significant event takes time to become real in the household. It travels by horse, by memory, by ink, by the reliability of roads and the honesty of mouths. This means most people live inside a world that is partly known and partly assumed. There are few final versions of things. A report changes shape each time it is retold. A newspaper may arrive with the authority of print and still be carrying information old enough to have already begun aging into something else. By the time you hear of a treaty, or a vote, or a riot, the people nearest the event may already be living with its consequences, while you are only just turning it over in conversation. That slowness can be frustrating, but it also creates a different sort of mind. Less frantic, perhaps. Less addicted to the next confirmation. You learn patience because no other habit is practical. You learn to tolerate not knowing. You learn to make decisions with partial information and then live with them without the illusion that certainty was ever available. Waiting becomes not an interruption of life, but part of its basic weather. The same is true of law and order. In the night, when noise from the street has nearly vanished and the house has contracted to the reach of embers, you can feel how close authority lived in this period. Not close in the sense of omnipresent state machinery, but close in the sense of neighbors, magistrates, constables, ministers, and elders whose faces are known. The law is not a distant abstract system you occasionally encounter through paperwork and institutions. It is personal, sometimes painfully so. The people who judge disputes may sit near you in church. The constable may also be the man whose fence line never pleased your uncle. A justice of the peace may be learned and fair, or vain and erratic, or honest in theory but not in all his friendships. Reputation, therefore, matters almost as much as fact. A person believed to be decent can survive certain accusations more easily than a person already thought troublesome. A person with kin, land, or standing will not find the world equally weighted against them as someone poor, itinerant, female, enslaved, indigenous, or free, but unprotected by the right sort of local confidence. And yet the intimacy of this system does something else too. It makes community itself part of enforcement. Shame becomes a real tool. So does public forgiveness. A quarrel can be settled, not because any pure justice descends from above, but because all involved must continue living near one another and would prefer not to turn every future market day into a fresh performance of old hostility. It is messy, uneven, sometimes compassionate, sometimes cruel, very human, very local. By daylight, these arrangements can feel merely tiresome. By night, they feel more revealing. You begin to understand how much of life rests, not on formal structure, but on memory. Who remembers a boundary correctly? Who remembers a debt? Who remembers a promise? Who remembers the year the creek flooded worst and which family helped pull another family's furniture above the line of ruin? Memory acts as archive, court record, social ranking, and cautionary tale all at once. It is not only law and news that move through memory. Politics does too. The new republic, for all its paper and argument, remains for many people something half felt and half overheard. George Washington may now be president under a constitution still fresh enough to feel experimental, but you do not wake each morning thinking first of the presidency. You think of the fire, the stock of food, the weather, the tasks waiting in your muscles before your eyes are fully open. National life filters downward through local concerns, taxes, land, roads, militia obligations, currency shortages, and the vague fear that faraway men may always be too certain of what nearer lives should look like. That does not mean people are indifferent. Not entirely. Taverns and meeting places prove otherwise. Menargue. Pamphlets circulate. Newspapers are read aloud with all the confidence of people who only partially trust what they are hearing. But daily labor trims political passion into usable lengths. Even strong opinions must coexist with exhaustion. There is something almost comic in imagining a man ready to speak grandly about Republican virtue. What politics, then, is braided into ordinary life without fully taking command of it. The nation may be new. The roof still leaks in old ways. The republic may be debated passionately. The cow still kicks the bucket with remarkable consistency. History in its largest voice and life in its nearest voice continue talking over each other. And most people learn to listen to both without letting either entirely drown the other out. As the night deepens, your thoughts pass toward religion again, because faith in this period is not confined to church walls any more than labor is confined to fields or shops. Belief shapes the emotional climate of ordinary existence. It gives names to suffering, reasons to endure, and a framework for death, which everyone sees often enough to require 1. Prayer before meals. Prayer at the sickbed. Prayer before travel. Prayer after surviving weather that looked momentarily inclined to become a judgment. These practices make the world feel less accidental, even when it remains just as dangerous. There is comfort in that. There is also pressure. A society steeped in religion has ways of noticing who appears properly grateful, properly humble, properly obedient, properly penitent. Moral reputation is a kind of second clothing, visible even when invisible. Some people find shelter in that framework, others find surveillance. Often it is both at once. A minister may speak of mercy on Sunday and reinforce hierarchy before supper. A family may pray sincerely and still perpetuate injustice without ever recognizing the contradiction as contradiction. Faith does not simplify the moral world. It merely gives it language. If you listen closely to the age, perhaps the most unsettling thing is not that people fail their own ideals. Human beings do that in any century. It is how ordinary the failure can become. Liberty spoken by men who own other human beings. Charity preached in communities quick to punish poverty as a moral weakness. Civilization praised on land taken from those already living with their own forms of order and sacredness. The day hides these contradictions by keeping everyone busy. The night lets them gather quietly at the edge of thought. And then the body returns to the center of things, because even the most reflective age remains trapped, or perhaps held, within flesh. Health in 1789 is not a stable background condition. It is an active negotiation. Every household knows this. An ache may be nothing, or it may be the opening chapter of a very bad season. A cough may pass, or it may settle in A fever may break, or it may take. Medicine is a blend of tradition, experiment, confidence, superstition, practical knowledge, and real care. Some remedies help, some do not. Some likely harm in the name of help. Most are attempted with sincerity. The household becomes a place of constant small medical judgment. Is the child too warm? Is the wound clean enough? Is the old woman truly weaker than yesterday or merely tired? Should one call a doctor and spend what little can be spent, or wait one more night and trust rest? Broth, herbs, or providence? Such decisions are made in kitchens and beside beds, by candlelight, by touch, by smell, by experience. There are no glowing devices offering reassurance or alarm. There is only observation and the courage to choose under uncertainty. This uncertainty shapes the emotional life of the age more deeply than any single event of national politics. Loss remains near. So does recovery. People watch one another with a practical intimacy born from this reality. A neighbor's good color returning after illness matters. A child running about after a week of stillness matters. A woman rising after childbirth and beginning again to direct the household matters. These are victories, even if no one uses that grand a word. As you lie in darkness, you can sense how much the society depends on bodies continuing to function. Work cannot easily absorb the absence of one healthy adult. A broken leg, a long fever, failing vision, or even a stubborn tooth can ripple outward into shortages, delays, and debt. There are no backup systems waiting. Community may help, yes, but community also has its own work, its own sick children, its own leaking roof, its own moral limits to charity. Health is therefore never merely personal. It is economic, social, spiritual, and domestic, all at once. The future, when imagined from this bed in this room with its smoke-darkened beams and half-sleeping children, therefore has a very particular shape. It is not bright with endless possibility. It is dimly lit, but steady. Better weather, better prices, better health, enough preserved food, a good marriage for a child, a little land, a repaired wagon, a safer winter, maybe the chance, if fortune and discipline were to become unusually cooperative, to rise just enough that tomorrow feels slightly less tight than yesterday. This sort of hope is incredibly tender once you notice it. It does not announce itself as ambition. It appears in plans, in the saving of scraps, in teaching a child to read a few more lines, in keeping aside a stronger board for the part of the roof most likely to fail, in buying nails now because by winter they may be harder to come by, in storing apples, preserving beans, stretching cloth, mending harness, and telling stories about bad years survived, so younger people will know survival is possible without expecting ease. Old people especially become guardians of this long, modest hope. They carry comparisons. They can say, We have seen a worse winter. We have known a year with less grain than this. We have buried, and still the household continued. Such statements are not comforting in a sentimental way. They are comforting because they are true. Experience becomes a kind of blanket, not warm enough to erase the cold, but thick enough to make it more endurable. Night also makes you aware of the weather in a different register. Daylight weather is planning. Night weather is atmosphere and threat. Heat lingers in boards and blankets. Cold enters through cracks with the confidence of a creditor. Rain sounds different after dark, less like inconvenience and more like a thing with intent. Wind against the walls can feel almost personal when you are tired enough. Without artificial light colonizing every corner, the moon and stars also matter more. They comfort, orient, and judge the cloud cover for tomorrow. The sky is part of the household's awareness even when no one is standing outside looking at it. And then there is rest itself, which in this age remains one of the few medicines available to rich and poor alike, though not equally easy for either to reach. Rest is physical before it is philosophical. Muscles unwinding, breath slowing, the mind finally losing its grip on the day's unfinished lists. Yet, complete rest is not simple in a crowded house. Babies stir. Older people wake to pain. Children roll sideways like ungoverned logs. A dog objects to a distant sound. Someone checks the fire again. A horse shifts outside. Sleep is earned, interrupted, resumed. It comes in layers. What strikes you from inside the reality of 1789 is how little of life can be cleanly separated. Politics bleeds into economy, economy into diet, diet into health, health into labor, labor into reputation, reputation into law, law into safety, safety into sleep, sleep into hope. The whole thing is one fabric, coarse perhaps, patched certainly, but continuous. Tug one edge and the whole weave answers. By now you are very nearly asleep, but not quite. Thoughts drift toward children, because every age finally reveals itself in how it imagines those not yet grown. In this world, children are not protected from reality so much as gradually introduced to it by immersion. They hear adult talk. They see grief. They carry work. They observe injustice before they possess words large enough to name it. They also learn songs, prayers, jokes, recipes, caution, competence, and the practical tenderness of being needed. Their future is the household's longest project. Every skill passed to them is a wager against oblivion. You realize that the age itself, for all its uncertainty, is doing something similar. The new republic is a child in many ways, serious, loud, ambitious, underdressed for the weather, and often very sure of itself before it has earned the right. The older habits of the world still hold it by the collar. Land, labor, hierarchy, religion, race, weather, disease, hunger. All the old masters remain. Paper promises will not abolish them in a single generation. Perhaps not in many. But still the child nation is being taught, corrected, praised, indulged, and sometimes frightened by consequences. It will grow into something, though no one here yet knows exactly what. And maybe that is the final feeling of life in 1789 as the night prepares to give way. Not certainty, not glory, not even optimism in the loud sense. It is continuity with a faint upward lean. A household banks its fire because morning will require it. A mother mends a shirt because tomorrow will wear it. A father checks the latch because pigs are incorrigible, and dawn is not improved by chasing them half-dressed across damp ground. An old woman teaches a child a prayer, or a measure, or a warning about river water, because memory is how the living protect the living. You can feel dawn far off now, not visible, but implied. The room is still dark, still warm in places and cold in others, still full of the quiet company that has followed you all through these hours. Soon the first person will stir. Soon the fire will be coaxed. Soon the same day and not the same day will begin again. The nation will still be uncertain. The roof will still need tending. The weather will still have opinions. The laws will still be uneven. Hope will still be modest. Work will still arrive early. But for these last moments, none of that needs your active attention. You have already walked through the house, the road, the market, the field, the hearth, the church, the tavern, the night, the body, the fear, the care, and the little determined hopes of ordinary people in ordinary time. You do not need to solve their lives. You only need to rest beside them for a moment longer. So let the dark keep softening. Let the sounds blur, the breathing near you, the occasional settling of wood, the far-off animal, the almost silent whisper of ash changing shape in the hearth. Let the unfinished thoughts loosen and drift like smoke that no longer belongs to a flame. The age will keep itself until morning. And you, for now, can simply sleep. By the time the labor of the day loosens its grip, you begin to notice a rare softness entering the house and the yard around it. It is not leisure in the modern sense, not a protected block of time set aside by schedule and defended like a treasure. It is thinner than that, quieter, almost shy. It arrives in the spaces left over when the urgent tasks have been pushed just far enough away that no one will be punished by mourning for pausing. You feel it first in the way people sit down without rising immediately again. A bench that held tools now holds tired bodies. A hand that gripped a hoe or a stirring spoon now rests flat on a knee for a full minute, maybe two, as if relearning what stillness is supposed to feel like. The room changes with that small surrender. It becomes less a workshop and more a shelter again. Someone hums. Not loudly, just enough to let the tune find the air. Another person joins a moment later, then stops, then joins again, because this kind of music does not require performance. It only requires familiarity. A fiddle might come out if the household owns one, or if a neighbor has wandered close enough to contribute more than conversation. If not, voices do the work well enough. Songs pass from one person to another the way bread passes at table, plain, welcome, and carrying more memory than ornament. You notice how naturally music belongs here, not because life is easy, but because it is not. Songs help measure the hours, soften the edges of repetition, and hold people together when there is no extra comfort to spare. A melody remembered from childhood, or a hymn heard so often it has settled into the bones, can make a hard room feel briefly kinder. There is something almost funny about how little it takes. A tune, a shared line, a verse half forgotten and repaired by whoever remembers the next part. That is enough to lift the room a little. Children become louder during these moments, though never for long. The release of the day reaches them quickly. They chase one another across narrow floor space or around the packed ground outside if the weather is still kind enough to permit it. Their energy returns all at once, as if hidden somewhere during work and only now brought back out. Adults watch with the tired amusement of people who know those same children will sleep hard within the hour and leave the morning no less demanding. Games appear in modest forms. Cards if someone owns them and has not yet worn them into soft, greasy surrender. Dice if there is a pair to be found. Pebbles, buttons, carved bits of wood. Almost anything can become a game if enough minds agree to treat it like one. Winning matters only briefly. The true reward is the permission to care about something trivial after spending a whole day caring only about what is necessary. Food sometimes returns in these hours, not as a meal exactly, but as leftovers shared without ceremony. A crust of bread, a little cold pork, apples stored from an earlier season if any remain. The appetite at night is different, less urgent, more reflective. You eat not because you are starving in this moment, though many have known days that bent that way, but because eating with others while the work is done feels like an affirmation that the household made it through another day without coming apart. Drink belongs to this softness too. In 1789, alcohol is not an interruption to ordinary life. It is part of ordinary life, woven through it with such regularity that later centuries often misunderstand it, either by romanticizing it into rustic charm or condemning it with more certainty than the evidence fully allows. In truth, it is practical, social, and deeply familiar. You take a cup, and the liquid in it is most likely cider, small beer, or a weak spirit carefully stretched so it does the most work possible. Water remains uncertain enough that fermented drink feels safer and more dependable. Even children may have something watered down, not as a reckless indulgence, but as common custom. The goal is not theatrical drunkenness. The goal is sustenance, ease, and trust in what enters the body. You raise the cup and feel that first swallow spread warmth through the chest more than the throat. It does not erase the fatigue. Nothing does that except sleep, and even sleep only negotiates with it. but it softens the hardness of the day just enough that conversation becomes easier. People who have spent 12 hours using their bodies for every necessary thing now find a little extra room inside themselves for talk. Taverns do this on a larger scale. If you are near one, and if the day has left enough energy to walk there, or the household itself is not demanding your full evening, then the tavern becomes one of the few public rooms where labor loosens its collar. Light spills from its windows with a kind of invitation that is half comfort and half warning. Inside are deals, gossip, argument, music, stale smoke, wet boots, and the mixed smell of drink, wool, mud, and human certainty. The tavern is not separate from society. It is society concentrated. Men discuss crops, taxes, rumors from Philadelphia or New York, debts, prices, militia obligations, the honesty of neighbors, the dishonesty of other neighbors, horses, roads, weather, and, occasionally, what the new federal government might become if left to grow unchecked, or if not given enough strength soon enough. They drink while saying these things, but the drink does not create the subjects. It merely smooths the hinges between them. You also see the limits of acceptable drinking clearly. A man who takes too much and too often becomes a cautionary example before he becomes a tragedy. Productivity matters too much, and community memory is too long for excess to remain invisible. A drunk is not merely a private fool. He is a public inconvenience, a risk to work, family, and reputation. So most people learn moderation not because they have read a philosophy of it, but because ordinary life punishes its absence. When you leave such a place, or when the household itself lets the evening settle without leaving home, the air outside meets you differently now. Night has cooled the ground. Weather becomes more intimate after dark. By day it is planning. By night it is atmosphere. The wind no longer tells you only what tomorrow's work may feel like. It tells you how your skin will receive the next hour, whether the fire must be fed more carefully, whether the blankets will be enough, whether the roof may begin speaking to you in drips before morning. In summer, the heat lingers stubbornly in walls and clothing. The house holds the day long after the sun has gone. Sleep in hot weather is restless and thin, the sort of sleep that sticks to the body rather than lifting it. Sweat gathers, cools, returns, and gathers again. Mosquitoes whine with a confidence that seems almost insulting. Children kick blankets away and then complain near dawn that they are cold. Adults do the same thing and complain less, which is one of the drearier privileges of age. In winter, cold behaves like an intruder with patience. It enters beneath doors, through seams in walls, through the tiny betrayals of every handmade surface. You wear layers indoors and call it wisdom rather than defeat. Fires are tended like living responsibilities because they are. Let the flame die too far, and the house does not simply become inconvenient. It becomes hostile. To wake in a winter room where the fire has been neglected is to understand immediately how thin the margin is between domestic life and raw exposure. Storms matter in every season. Rain after dark has a different authority. It begins as sound on roof or ground, then becomes thought. Is the grain covered well enough? Will the road hold if travel is needed tomorrow? Did the line of washing come in before dusk? Is the stream likely to swell? Thunder takes all these private calculations and amplifies them with one large indifferent voice. Lightning turns the familiar yard into a white sketch of itself, then hands it back to darkness as if nothing happened. You learn the sky because there is no alternative. Clouds, wind, the smell of the air, the behavior of animals, the way the pressure seems to settle on the skin before a storm. All these become information. It is almost humorous, in a dry way, how much better many households read the weather than they read the newest constitutional arguments. But the weather can flatten corn. The Constitution has not yet shown itself eager to dry laundry or save hay. As darkness deepens fully, the world contracts. Without streetlights, without electric glow, without engines humming in the background as proof that civilization is still awake somewhere else, the night becomes complete. Firelight rules the room. Candles, if used at all, are used carefully. One tallow candle may light a whole corner and be expected to earn its keep. People trim wicks and watch wax with the seriousness of those who know that light costs labor. The house transforms in this light. Objects lose their practical edges and gain softer, stranger forms. A stool becomes a crouching thing until you remember it by touch. Coats hanging on pegs look briefly like visitors of questionable intent. Shadows move when the flame moves, and because the flame always moves, the room never entirely holds still. Yet there is comfort in that too. The shifting shadows prove the fire lives, and as long as the fire lives, warmth and food and tomorrow remain possible. Night work continues, but it changes character. There is less lifting, more tending, less hauling, more mending. Someone shells beans into a bowl. Someone darns a sock. Someone checks a harness or sharpens a blade near the best light remaining. These are tasks suited to low flames and tired minds. They ask for patience more than strength, and patience is sometimes all that evening has left to offer. Conversation lowers with the light. People no longer waste words. The body itself seems to prefer quieter speech after dusk, as if loudness belongs to the business of day and not to the receiving of night. There can be a surprising tenderness in this quiet, not a sentimental tenderness, not a staged one, but the plain tenderness of people who have survived another full day in one another's company, and for a little while require nothing more heroic than shared presence. And then, almost without anyone marking it, the house crosses from evening into night proper. Children are settled. Cups are put aside. The door is checked. Tools are where they should be, or near enough not to matter until morning. The last useful flame is banked lower. In this hour, privacy once again reveals itself as scarce, and the household gathers inward. You lie down and feel the room around you, not as architecture but as proximity. Other bodies breathe. Someone shifts. A child whispers once in sleep. The smell of ash and wool has sunk so deeply into the house that it no longer seems like a smell at all. Only the natural condition of shelter. You listen without trying. The sounds of others become part of the arrangement of your own rest. There is a kind of trust in this, though not always an easy one. To sleep near others is to surrender your solitude, but also to borrow safety from numbers. If trouble comes, you will not meet it alone. If the baby cries, someone hears. If the fire changes in the wrong way, someone wakes. If the wind grows strange or a horse outside begins stamping with unusual urgency, the household will stir like a single organism. Not gracefully, perhaps, but effectively enough. The older you are, the more you understand this. Solitude may sometimes look elegant in stories, but survival has a preference for witness. Someone must know if you are ill. Someone must hear if you fall. Someone must remember where the medicine was kept, which board in the floor complains too much, which bucket is nearest the hearth, which road to take for help in weather bad enough to make help itself uncertain. You begin to feel, lying here, how little of life in 1789 is built on the fantasy of total independence. People admire self-reliance loudly. Yes, they praise it in speeches and in public memory. But actual living is an intricate web of dependence disguised as duty, affection, trade, and habit. The house taverns because many hands hold it up. The field yields because many backs bend. The family endures because many small, unseen acts keep stitching the days together. Outside, the weather moves on, whether you watch it or not. Inside, the fire settles lower. Your body grows heavier against the mattress stuffed with straw and compromise. There is still danger in the world, of course. Fire, illness, debt, bad harvest, bad luck, a sudden change in law or in the price of salt. All of it still exists. But for now, each danger is outside the reach of your hands. The only work left is the work of sleep. So you let the sounds of the house keep watch. You let the weather sit at the walls without needing to solve it. You let the evening's music, drink, laughter, and quiet all sink together into one softer memory. And as your breathing slows to match the gentler rhythm of the room, you feel the day finally recede, not erased, just folded away, like a worn garment that will be needed again at dawn, sometime in the night, before true sleep has fully claimed you. Your mind drifts toward those thoughts that belong only to the hour when the body is tired enough to stop resisting honesty. The room is dark now, except for the safest faint glow from the hearth. And in that half-darkness, the future appears in the modest shape it usually takes in 1789. Not as a grand horizon filled with shining promises, but as the next harvest, the next winter, the next child learning to carry what the last generation can no longer lift. People do not dream small because they lack imagination. They dream small because they understand the size of the forces around them. Weather is large. Illness is large. Debt is large. Fire is large. Land can be generous and merciless in the same season. The nation itself may be new, but the practical burdens of being alive are old and broad-shouldered, and they do not move aside simply because constitutions have been written and offices established. So improvement is imagined in increments. A better roof before the snow. Enough saved to buy a cow or replace a wagon wheel without borrowing. A child taught to read one page more than the parent could. A field that yields just enough extra grain to make the winter less thin. A marriage kind enough to feel like shelter. A road mended well enough that apples arrive at market without bruising into mush and disappointment. These are not glamorous hopes, but they are real ones. And real hopes have a way of lasting longer than theatrical promises. You sense these dreams around you even when no one speaks them aloud. They live in how carefully scraps are saved, in how old cloth is mended again instead of discarded, in how seed is kept back with almost religious discipline, in how elders tell stories of the hard years, not to frighten children, but to teach them that endurance is possible and that panic is usually less useful than preparation. Memory becomes its own form of inheritance here. You do not always pass down money or land. Sometimes you pass down judgment, habits, warnings, and the ability to read trouble before trouble fully names itself. Older people matter greatly in a world like this because they remember the shape of seasons no ledger can fully hold. They know which winter was the one that split beams with cold, which summer brought insects thick as smoke, which road floods first, which cough sounds ordinary, and which one makes a mother stand still in the doorway and listen harder. Their bodies may have slowed, but their usefulness has not ended. It has simply changed form, from labor of strength to labor of memory. Aging in this world is neither romantic nor hidden. It happens in front of everyone. Hands stiffen in the visible act of work. Knees announce themselves on stairs. Eyes push newspapers farther away and still fail to make peace with the print. A back that once lifted sacks now lifts smaller things and complains about them with a directness that would almost be amusing if it were not so familiar. There is no retirement to mark a clean transition. You contribute as long as you can, then differently when you must, and often worry privately that even differently may someday not be enough. That fear of becoming a burden moves quietly through many older hearts. You can feel it in the way people insist on helping, even when help costs them. They shell peas, mend shirts, zod herbs, watch children, stir broth, advise younger hands, and remain alert to every need they can still meet. Pride and affection are not separate forces here. They move together. To be useful is to remain woven into the household, and to remain woven in is one of the age's deepest forms of security. Death, too, stays near enough to shape thought without necessarily dominating it. This is not a century where mortality can be hidden away behind institutions or softened by expert language. Death may come from childbirth, fever, bad water, infection, a horse with a poor opinion of your reflexes, or simply an old body deciding it has completed enough winters. Because it is so near, people speak of it more plainly, though not always more gently. Wills are practical. Instructions are brief. Objects matter because they are few. A Bible, a guest, a shawl, a kettle, a quote, a bit of land, if fortune ever smiled that long. What you leave behind is measured not in abundance, but in usefulness. Lying here, you begin to understand that what people really try to preserve is not wealth in the loud sense, but continuity. A household continuing, children fed, a name remaining decent enough that neighbors still answer when called, tools staying in the family, recipes and remedies and local wisdom surviving one more generation. The great American experiment may be unfolding in assembly rooms and newspapers, but most families measure success in whether daily life can continue without breaking. Outside the house, the dark holds its own conversations. A horse shifts in the yard. Somewhere farther off, a dog barks once and then seems to reconsider the necessity of further commentary. Wind slides along the outer wall with a dry whisper of something not quite human and not quite unfriendly. In summer, insects stitch the night into one unbroken piece. In winter, the stillness is so complete, it almost feels like pressure. Either way, the sounds beyond the walls never fully disappear. They simply arrange themselves into patterns the sleeping mind learns to trust. You drift lower and begin listening rather than thinking. This is one of the lost skills of worlds without engines and electric hum. Night does not become silent. It becomes legible. A familiar creak means the house cooling. A new creak means perhaps the weather has changed, or someone is awake when they ought not to be. Light rain on the roof reassures. Heavy rain makes plans collapse in your head, even while your eyes remain closed. The wrong sound from the hearth can pull you upright before your mind has formed a sentence around why. Fire is the last great presence before sleep. All day it has served. It cooked, warmed, dried, lit, and held the house together in its practical, hungry way. Now it must be tamed without being extinguished too completely. To leave too much flame is dangerous. To leave too little is to wake to a house that feels suddenly like weather rather than shelter. The balancing of that last glow is almost ceremonial. Not beautiful in a grand sense, but deeply meaningful. Tomorrow depends on how tonight's embers are left. Everyone knows stories of houses lost to carelessness. A spark leaping where it should not. A chimney lining itself too thickly with soot. A candle tipping. A child reaching. A tired adult failing to look twice. In towns, a single fire may become an entire street's catastrophe. In the countryside, a fire may leave a family standing in the dark with only the sky above and the smell of years of labor turning to black air. No one forgets this for long. Even in rest, some portion of the mind continues keeping faith with caution. And yet fire is not feared in a simple way. It is too beloved for that. It is the nearest thing the house has to a second heart. You can almost hear that in the way people speak of it. They do not merely have a fire. They keep it. They tend it. They bank it. They trust it and mistrust it in equal measure. That is true of many things in 1789. Weather, water, animals, governments, neighbors, even hope itself. Trust is rarely absolute. It is a working arrangement. From somewhere deep in this growing sleep, your mind circles back toward children. They have spent the whole day moving through the adult world, carrying messages, chasing brief moments of play, helping, listening, learning. Their childhood is not protected from labor, but neither is it empty of joy. It is simply close to reality. They know the sounds of the house, the smell of the fire, the feel of wool against skin, the shape of hunger, the comfort of bread, the hush that comes when an elder begins telling a story worth hearing twice. They are being made, little by little, into the next keepers of these routines. That may be the most powerful continuity of all. Not the Constitution, not the markets, not even the churches, though all of those matter. The most durable thing may be the transmission of ordinary life from one set of hands to the next. How to judge weather, how to salt meat, how to listen for sickness, how to mend cloth, how to survive a winter without becoming dramatic about it, how to laugh anyway, how to work with others even when one would occasionally prefer to throw a shoe at them. Human civilization depends more on these lessons than on speeches, though speeches tend to receive better furniture. The nation outside these walls is still making itself. It has declared much and secured less. It speaks of liberty while depending openly on bondage. It praises equality while arranging daily life through rank, race, sex, property, and proximity to power. It dreams westward across land, already inhabited and old with memory. It argues about representation while many people who build the country through labor will never be represented in any generous sense. These contradictions are not hidden. They are simply lived with, defended, ignored, or endured depending on who has the right to look away. But the household cannot afford long philosophical paralysis. Morning will come regardless of unfinished moral clarity. So ordinary life continues with all these truths inside it. Food is still cooked in unjust systems. Children are still raised in unequal worlds. Songs are still sung beside suffering. A nation can be both new and old in its failures. That is perhaps one of the hardest truths to carry, and one that the darkness, with its refusal to flatter, makes briefly easier to admit. Your breathing has slowed now to that pleasant edge where thought loses its sharp corners. The house feels smaller and safer in the same instant. The bodies around you are no longer interruptions to solitude, but part of the shelter itself. Another person sighs in sleep. Someone near the wall shifts and then stills again. A child takes one absurdly dramatic breath, and settles into the kind of deep unconsciousness that only the very tired and the very young seem able to find without effort. Beyond the walls, the night is wide. Above them, the sky is probably very clear unless weather is gathering. In a world without artificial glare, stars look less decorative and more like part of the original structure of things. People know them, if not always by formal, astronomical name, then by season, direction, story, and repetition. The moon matters too. It lights roads, changes sleep, governs work, and gives shape to time in a way modern clocks only imitate. Under such a sky, the household seems both very small and very complete. You think, perhaps for the last time before sleep really takes you, about what life in 1789 actually feels like from the inside. Not the painted version. Not powdered wigs and tidy speeches and symbolic portraits. It feels like ash on the air in the morning. Like a shared room. Like rough linen. Like water carried, because it will not carry itself. Like children who are loved and put to work without anyone seeing a contradiction. Like songs after labor. Like cider. Like weather as fact rather than topic. Like danger made ordinary through repetition. Like modest hope guarded against disappointment by practicality. Like exhaustion that does not feel tragic because nearly everyone around you carries it too. It also feels communal in a way modern people may find both beautiful and suffocating. There is little privacy, little waste, little room for fantasy detached from labor. But there is closeness, dependence, continuity, witness. If you suffer, someone hears. If you laugh, someone joins. If you die, the household does not discover it through paperwork. It discovers it in the quiet beside the bed. Hardness and intimacy live side by side here, and neither can be understood properly without the other. Now the night is almost complete in you. The last active thoughts are slowing. The house is still. The fire is low and safe. The wind, if it remains, has become part of the background. The future no longer needs planning for this hour. The nation can continue arguing without you. The market can wait. The road can stay muddy until morning. The weather will do as it pleases whether you lie awake or not. There is nothing left to mend tonight. Nothing left to stir. No bucket that must be carried before dawn. Only rest remains. You have walked through a full day in 1789 and felt how heavy and ordinary it is. How demanding, how deeply human. You have stepped across rough floors, listened to town sounds and animal sounds, carried the weight of work and weather and law and memory. You have sat in the dimness of evening while songs rose and cups were passed. You have watched fire become comfort and warning at once. You have felt how a life can be narrow in means and still vast in endurance. So now let the room soften around you. Let the closeness feel warm rather than crowded. Let the dark hold the house without asking anything more from it. Let every unfinished concern step quietly back from the bed. There will be another morning for all that. For now, the embers are enough. The roof still holds. The people around you still breathe. The night has asked for nothing except stillness. And in that stillness, at last, you may have what people in every century have wanted after a long and uncertain day. Good night.